Well, let's go on and talk about a few hot topics. I would like to bring in our third person to join us in here. This is Shay Bonhag, one of our volunteers from up north, as we call it. And Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you for what's the latest talk. What's hot in the news this week that we get to contribute our 5 cents worth?
Absolutely. Well, what's hot right now is D.O.G.E. D.O.G.E is everywhere. You're hearing about D.O.G.E, all the podcasts, all the news organizations. So it's been about 2.5 weeks since D.O.G.E, the Department of Government Efficiency, was created, and it's wasted no time in shining light on various areas it believes to be inefficient or wasteful. One such area is thousands of government buildings that lay vacant or largely unused. Elon Musk, who is heading up D.O.G.E, took to X to inform the public that, quote, not even one government building was found to be even half occupied. 4 days later, he added that some government buildings, including some in D.C., have been taken over by squatters. According to Musk, roughly $15 billion a year are spent on utilities and maintenance of unused U.S. government buildings, both here and abroad. On a different note, Musk announced on Monday, February 3rd, that USAID and other government agencies have been funding various media groups around the world. That same day, the D.O.G.E subcommittee in the House of Representatives invited leaders from NPR and PBS to address biased news coverage at a public hearing in March. The report published on the House website stated that both NPR and PBS spend hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government each year. As the deep dive into USAID heated up, the White House published a short list titled, "At USAID, Waste and Abuse Runs Deep." There were a lot of examples given on that particular list. Some notable things were $1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia, $70,000 for musical production in Ireland, $2.5 million for electric vehicles for Vietnam, $47,000 for an opera in Colombia, $32,000 for comic books in Peru, as well as some sex changes in Guatemala, and the list goes on, including funding tourism in Egypt. We even saw some references to COVID and Al-Qaeda. It was very exciting. So I want to go to our panel. Let's talk about this. We're diving into so many different areas, and they've barely started to scratch the surface. This seems to be very much like a government audit. And I thought of you a lot, Shay, when I was going through these lists, because you've spent so much time with all the articles you've written for us looking at the little wastes.
I know.
And now we're seeing even bigger wastes, or even just not even the waste, because some of these things are wastes and some of them are just misuse or lack of use. I mean, we have empty government buildings that now have squatters in them, and I'm sure we're paying to keep up those buildings.
Of course.
So, right. What areas have you been surprised, if any, that have come to light through all of this?
I haven't been surprised at all about any of it. I've just been more surprised that it's made it to the public. The fact that, Senator Paul comes out with the Festivus every year, and he outlines all the things that we're spending money for that are kind of crazy, and that's just literally, from what I'm seeing so far, is just the tip of the iceberg. Because what D.O.G.E is finding out as they start diving into more and more of the details, they find out all these crazy things that are being funded. And no one agreed to any of this. This is just all happening. I don't know if you saw the interview with Senator Rubio, well, now the Secretary Rubio, who is the interim director of U.S. aid, right? Mm-hmm. And he said a lot of times the stuff that they're funding in these programs through U.S. aid is counterproductive to what they're trying to do with the Department of State. So it's like, oh my goodness. So the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and we got both things going. I mean, that's the worst case, right? It's just the worst case. I mean, we don't have a constant, consistent focus forward, even if we thought some of this stuff would be worthy.
Yeah.
And I think, the more you expose it to transparency, the more that people see it, the more clear it's going to become that, wait a minute, nobody in their right minds wants that funded. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And this isn't a political issue. This is one of just, how do you want your taxpayer money spent? I mean, if anything, I'd like to support what the Department of State has always done, trying to build relationships, and I don't want us finding another group that's undermining that. So I'm not happy. I'm happy in one sense of getting it all out there, but what it says is a clear story here that is not what we want to hear.
What about you, Robin?
Well, I'm thrilled to see the Band-Aid ripped off and all of this being shown. In doing my research, you pointed to the White House statement that it's on there. And then as you go out and branch out beyond what the White House says and what the media is saying, they're equivocating and detracting and dismissing. And to me, this is one of the biggest reasons why I got involved in Convention of States. Our debt is $36 trillion. Every baby born today is born into debt slavery. That is not the country that I grew up in. And to see this ripped open, I mean, the vacant buildings, that's just not good business sense. If you're not using the building, sell it, demolish it, tear it down. I know that idea is upsetting to people, and people may lose jobs over this, but we cannot sustain ourselves like this. I speak out so that the grandchildren that I've not met yet will have a better life and not be saddled with all of this debt. It's disruptive. I get that. But at the pace that government has made change in my lifetime, it's kind of refreshing to see the Band-Aid torn off and to see the real numbers. There's waste out there. And the second part of this, I mean, I'm not unfriendly or anything towards other countries and civilizations, but I do think we need to take care of American people first. Our education program has fallen apart. In following social media in my own little community, I see so many people asking for help with food, asking for help with rent, with basic needs. They don't have it. It has grown over these last several years. I laughed the other day, I bought eggs. In the last month, every time I have purchased eggs, it has started a conversation in the grocery store about the price of eggs. And I watched one young mother stand there. She said, I have two hungry teenage boys and I rely on these eggs for protein. She said, I can't really afford to buy this. And she stood there like putting the eggs in and taking them back. So we're spending money on things in other countries to promote another agenda. We're not taking care of things at home. So while this is uncomfortable for some, I'm happy to see it happen.
Yep.
Absolutely. And you know, that analogy of well, and just what you were saying about the government buildings. Why do we have empty government buildings? And this isn't a new problem. If you go back to the archives of the Obama administration's White House, which, by the way, there are archived websites for each of the past administrations, at least in the past current administrations, he actually had a plan for trying to get rid of these problems. At that time, I want to say, I was looking at it yesterday, there were 12,000 I believe empty buildings or not used buildings that were just excess. And I think that number may be lower now, but it's hard because they have different categories. There's the partly used, the ones we're using 10%, the ones that are completely empty. Are you what counts as a building? If you have a shed, is that a building? It's like you look at these things and it's, oh my gosh, it makes your head hurt. And yet we're so in debt, like you said, Robin. And if we were talking about a normal individual who went to someone for financial help because they were deeply in debt, the counselor would say, hey, you have 3 cars. If you are deeply in debt, you need to get rid of some of these cars. Well, you have an extra house, sell the house, right? This is what any normal individual has to do if they get themselves into the hole when it comes to debt. And that's what has to happen with our federal government. These are just, they're just logical things to be doing. Now, when it comes to things like the media, I have to say that's the one that raised my eyebrows a little bit. Growing up, there was programming on PBS and you knew it was government funded. And I didn't think about it a lot, but it does present a bit of a question now, I think, for us when it comes to federal funds going to media. And I think when it first started, there was probably an aspect where it's like the government helping fund the railroad, right? You're allowing people an avenue to something that is new and uncharted territory. And that was very much a public service. Now the whole society has changed where this isn't something that people don't have easy access to, or at least not in the way that it was when it originally became public funded. So I think that's an interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing more on that conversation with regard to, should the federal government have its fingers in the media and funding the media at all, or should this be something where, for the sake of freedom of speech and not having the government's interference, we should not have any funding of any kind of media entity? What do you think?
Well, see, I think you're on the right track. It seems to me that what's happening in U.S. aid is I think Jim mentioned it. It's just the tip of the iceberg, and that's what I'm afraid of. If we're really trying to think in terms of limiting term limits and balancing the budget and so forth, and that's really important to us, and I think it is for a lot of people in the United States. What we're seeing is unleashed spending of all these things. So why do we have all these buildings? Why do we have all these programs? Why do we really need all those things? You probably saw the note from Betsy DeVos, and you can argue about that, but she's a local Michigan person, and her comment is that the Department of Education is so broken that she doesn't know how to address it. Right? There's a case where the government has taken on a new role of really working through the Department of Education. Is that necessary? And should we be, as a convention of states, shouldn't we be pulling that back and saying, well, we don't really need all of these things to happen because we've got a local government and we've got state government whose role it really is ultimately to manage these things as closer to us as the people. So I think the USAID information is just the tip of the iceberg. The fact that the buildings are vacant is the tip of the iceberg that we're seeing. And we've never really seen it before and never put it together in the kind of way that DOGE has taken it. And every time they touch something, they're now in Treasury and they can't get access to something or another. Somebody's upset with access. Well, I mean, the reality is they don't want to share transparency, what is actually happening. The more we know, the better it is for us long term.
Absolutely. And I just want to add something for clarification here. Shay, you said U.S. aid, and to me, we know that's an acronym, USAID, but it makes it sound like we're giving aid. And actually, this stands for the United States Agency for International Development.
Right.
international development, I will go back and say that with the problems that we have here in America with education, with hunger and lack of housing, I think this money ought better be spent on taking care of Americans and bringing them up to the standards that they deserve to have.
Mhm.
Yeah.